They're on Boros Energy versus Chris Foshe on Domain Zoo. Now, both of these decks fairly aggressive, able to put out a lot of hurt very quickly. What is your thought going into this aggro v aggro matchup?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that people like about the Domain Zoo deck is it does a couple things pretty well. So one, it has this really quick clock with these big beefy creatures, right? And that is something that's like pretty greatly appreciated by players. You want to kill your opponent very quickly, and with all these combo decks around, not give them time. And it has a little bit of interaction. We're seeing Tribal Flames in the main. We're seeing Consign to Memory in the main here for Chris. So very much taking that kind of tempo-y beat downy role that we've seen Zoo decks do in the past. Boros Energy plays like kind of, a modern age Zoo or Jund deck and gets to the board really quickly. Of note, Rodney Bedell is playing a innovative build of the deck with like Memnite in the main deck and Enduring Renewal. We'll get to that one in a second. But, typically what ends up happening is there's a lot of battling for the board. Rodney's deck to kind of clog it up a bit better, but Chris has Scion of Draco with Leyline of the Guild Pack to really take things over. So we'll have to see, how this exactly plays out.
Yeah, I mean, Chris certainly capable of some pretty explosive, impactful starts here. If we see any of these ley line draws, but I mean, Rodney on Boros Energy. I mean, for a long time in Modern, especially before these bans, this was the deck to beat, and it is still able to, put up results and really work its way through tournaments. So, a big battle here between these two aggressive decks. Very interesting. These sort of cards in Rodney's deck that we don't often see in the Boros Energy lists. We've got the Memnite, we've got these Enduring Renewals.
Which chat obviously knows. We all know Enduring Renewal, right? That's a card that's very commonly played. So I think
everyone knows 4 mana white enchantment Enduring Renewal that has us play with our hand revealed. If you would draw, there it is. I mean, bringing it up on screen feels egregious because everyone knows it. But if you would draw a card, top part of your library. If it's a creature, put it in your graveyard. Otherwise, draw a card.
So this is going to have some interesting play patterns. I'm trying to figure out if there's actually like a weird combo. One thing it does, it kind of fuels your Flages. Your Flages, like you just have all the resources forever. You can't really get creatures off the board. And this is very powerful as well with things like Ranger Captain of Eos, where if your Eos would die, it would go back to your hand. So you can lock your opponent out. They can't cast on creature spells. And you can search up a 1-drop every turn.
Yeah, very, very powerful stuff here as we're getting into the game. And we're going to see Rodney starting up with a Ragavan on turn 1. A lot of very strong starts are possible for Boros Energy. I think it's very hard to say, which one at any given moment is the strongest, but worth noting that Rodney's only running 2 Ragavans. So, having it on turn 1 here, game 1, pretty nice.
Yeah. Now, turn 1, not seeing anything, Rodney plays the Ragavan, and typically this is sort of what you want, right? Now, Chris's deck is full of big, beefy creatures that can block that. So if you're a Rodney Bedell fan, you're going to want to see some sort of removal spell that's going to hopefully stop something like a Territory or Kavu from stopping the Ragavan.
Yeah, as we are back over to Chris now, who I believe has Domain already.
It looks that way to me. Yeah, blue-red in the Nabzan. So there's the Scion of Draco.
Geez, turn 2 Scion. That is quite the blocker for this Ragavan.
Oh, and Rodney just caught something I didn't notice. I don't know if anyone did. So when Rodney fetched, you see Rodney smile. We got Sacred Foundry, but one of our sleeves was stuck together and we had another land. So when Rodney untapped, realized they had 2 lands. And so Rodney just immediately calls a judge. It's like, I accidentally added a land into play. This is supposed to be in my deck. Now, this is going to be a GRV, I'm almost sure. And then Rodney is just going to shuffle the deck and draw a card. Nothing's changed,
Right,
we fetched, played it. There was no information gained. And, it's not, it doesn't look like it's supposed to be in Rodney's hand. It looks like the players are confirming here. Yeah, I see 6 cards there from Rodney. Was on a, we're just going to count and make sure everything is good and clean here. But yeah, it's a situation where that's clearly from the deck. It was just stuck to the Sacred Foundry, and then we'll probably just continue play from here.
Yeah, we'll see as the judge is, looking things over, making the decision here. But I mean, regardless of what happens, Rodney has got to find a way to get through this Scion, which not an easy task here.
Yeah, the Scion, bigger than most bolt effects. Obviously, Galvanic Discharge can grow, but we have no energy right now, so we can't get it. Thraben Charm's removal spell we're seeing from these decks, that would require another creature. So Rodney would really need a Mimknight here, plus the Thraben Charm in order to connect, which would be a very sort of sick play to have happen. But this card, when it was originally released, it's like huge body and hardness to kill while being, essentially cheap, gives it a lot of impact. 2-mana card, you can't Fatal Push, you can't Prismatic Ending.
Yeah, so we're going to attack it, and then once we block, that's going to put 2 damage on it from the Ragavan. Follow that up with the Thraben Charm. That will be enough to do it. I mean, it's going to take 2 of our cards, but it will take care of the Scion. And we're going to see a Territorial Kavu come down for Chris, following up with just another huge threat.
Yep. And you're seeing Chris put a dice on this Kavu. That's much more just representing, hey, I have domain, and try to make it clear it's not a 10-10. But yeah, I mean, a good play there, I think, from Chris, actually, just like, don't let Rodney get more resources, hit some of your removal spells to answer this Draco, and just force Rodney to have something like a Discharge, like a Thraben Charm. Especially if it was Discharge, that card will just answer, it will answer your Draco eventually.
Yeah, so we're going to see Fable, the Mirror Breaker, as the play for Rodney. Going to make the Goblin Shaman. Pass back over to Chris. Rodney really wishing that they had their one of Blood Moon right now.
Yeah, the one of Blood Moon is going to go a long way if it can hit the board this game.
Well, Fable's a good way to dig for it a little bit.
Very true. Of note, Rodney did draw Enduring Renewal. I believe that is in hand. So that could be making its first ever NRG feature match area appearance, which is wild. It's such a commonly big part of the format, but we just haven't never seen it.
Another Scion for Chris. Devastating for Rodney to see your Domain Zoo opponent go turn 2 Scion, follow it with Kavu, follow it with Scion. What a sequence here. As we are going to attack with the Kavu trigger, go ahead and discard and draw a card.
Yep. And you see Chris getting rid of Ragavan there, representing, Leyline Binding here with this Plains. It's sort of the only big thing. We saw Chris tap down the Triome, which to me, there's nothing that really the Triome could do that's typical of these decks, but Plains is the one thing that has got to be on Rodney Bedell's mind with Binding there, as it looks like not what we like from the Fable.
Yeah, not what we like at all. I think we pitched 2 lands and found 2 more.
I think that's right. Now, once the Surveil land, so it's like you get a little value, but a little value isn't so great against 9 power on the board.
Yeah, 9 power, and also the Kavu has, first strike trample?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, so, I mean, can't even really, chump with the Goblin.
Yeah, it's looking tough for Rodney. Rodney's hand, has a Ranger Captain, has a Ragavan, has the ability to go grab something like an Onslaught Pride or a Guide of Souls with this Ranger Captain. But like you're saying, first strike, trample, it's so hard to beat a 5/5 in combat, and now your chump blocking doesn't even work. So let alone the first striking 5/5. Oh, I think we're getting the Mimknight Nile.
Oh, as we are going to go ahead and get the Mimknight, as predicted, play our tap land. I mean, this is just such a threatening position for Chris here. I mean, you have to, against this deck, be constantly scared of cards like Tribal Flames and Lightning Bolt, of which Chris has 4 of each, and 4 Phlages. A lot of ways to just get the last little bit of damage across to Rodney.
Yeah, and that's a big part of this domain deck, right? Is it kind of hits in chunks of like 4 and 5. So in some ways, it sort of reminds me, of formats like Dan, right? You only need to hit once or twice before you're really threatening lethal, despite only hitting once or twice.
Yeah, and there's Leyline Binding for the Goblin Shaman. We're going to trigger the Kavu here. And it looks like we are
Tribal flamesing.
scooping it up. Yeah, Tribal Flames, that'll do it.
Yeah, and you called it there now. Like, how are you supposed to get out of that situation even without the binding, right? Like, I'm pretty sure Rodney was maybe just almost dead there with the tribal flames of itself. But even if it wasn't, Rodney wouldn't be able to fetch, would be on such a low life total. A really tough spot to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Congratulations to Chris taking that one down. As we're going to take a quick look at the decks here. Here's Rodney's Boros Energy list. And we've already talked a little bit about, the Memnite and the Enduring Renewal. But let's take a look at the sideboard, Mason, and talk about what Rodney could be bringing in. I mean, I see number 2 Blood Moon. Seems pretty
Mhm.
huge.
Yeah, the number 2 Blood Moon's a big one. I think also a bunch of cards we have for Breach are incidentally hitting the parts of the domain deck here. So like Wear Tear, for example, great way to answer either the Scion or a Leyline Binding or both, as long as there isn't a Leyline of the Guild Pact in play. But it does also remove the Leyline of the Guild Pact and let you unlock your other copy. So I think we're going to see that one. Excuse me there, sorry. We're going to also see Wrath of the Skies. It doesn't basically ever kill a Draco, but it kills the rest. And you got to do what you got to do. And I think Rodney can position themselves in such a controlling fashion that this might be a very realistic plan. Maybe the Wrath in the full 3 of is too much, but I would be kind of shocked that isn't at least a consideration here for Rodney.
Yeah, absolutely. And might be able to get a look at Chris's list as well here and see what he is working with. Taking a look particularly at the sideboard. I mean, we've got pest control, got some
Yeah.
wear tears of our own. What do you think? What do you think Chris is interested in?
So yeah, I think pest control is a great way to sort of clean up the like Ocelot Pride, Guide of Souls parts of the deck. We mentioned it before how like sometimes in this matchup what ends up happening is prides get a little bit out of hand. And even though you have all the 5/5s, your opponent has all these 1/1s. So I imagine that I could see Thraben Charm. It's a great way to maybe kill one of these cheap creatures for 2 mana, but also answer a Flage. That's a big thing. Could also see Surgical because Flage is so important. In Flage Mirrors or any matchup where that kind of card matters, having Surgical to stop the opposing Flage is a great way to sort of go about things. Now, I could see where Chris doesn't really want that card. We have enough sort of other things that like we feel like we're going to be fine. We can beat a Flage, but that is a card that is definitely on the mind of anyone who's playing Flage of like, well, it wouldn't be unreasonable for my opponent to bring in a Surgical, which is a true testament to Flage. It looks like the players are mulliganing here.
Yeah, so we're gonna go ahead and get back down into our match. Game 2 here. Chris up a game. Rodney Bedell on the play. It looks like we're taking a mull to 6. And I think this might be another Ragavan start for Rodney. Although his Guide of Souls also an option. I think there's also an Ocelot Pride in there. Rodney spoiled for choice on this turn 1.
Yeah, has an Ajani as well too.
Wow.
Yeah.
Choosing to start with the Ragavan. I think Rodney is a little light on lands in hand. In fact, this Sacred Foundry might be the only one. This Ragavan might be the plan to try and be able to cast more of our spells, as Chris is just going to play a Triome.
Yeah, I think Rodney also, very experienced in this format. Lots of times the Domain Zoo's ideal start is to do this, fetch the Triome essentially, right? And have that Leyline Binding unlock the Tribal Flames. So Rodney kind of knows like, yeah, there might be something in the way and they can, sometimes interact. But if I play this Ragavan, I'm guaranteed the hit. And like you said, when I'm light on mana, I really want to make sure that I can double spell on turn 2.
Yeah, as we are going to see exactly that happen with Guide of Souls and Ocelot Pride. This is going to gain Rodney a life and also secure us that cat token at the end of turn. Oh, and an energy. Don't forget that.
Mm-hmm. And the energy is huge. We talked last game about how Galvanic Discharge can get to the spot where you can kill a Draco, but Rodney wasn't there. And since the banning of Amped Raptor, your incidental energy producers are just much lower, right? It's just Guide and your other Galvanics that are giving you energy in these decks now, which means, you just don't have as much floating energy around to answer multiple Dracos. So getting this Guide going is huge here.
Yeah, and I mean, it's wild to me how even with just one land, Rodney's already so close to threatening City's Blessing.
Yeah.
Because we have Ragavan, which is going to make a token. We've got Ocelot Pride, which can easily make a token. If we find a land to play a Johnny, that's 3 new permanents.
That's a ton. I mean, that would be, that's exactly what we talked about. Like the Ocelot Pride takes over the game, and you have to have cards like Pest Control for that. So Chris here really wants to cast Pest Control.
Yeah, as we are fetching our card here, can set up Domain.
Yeah, it is interesting, right? Because if Chris has Pest Control, we have to get Steam Vents. I'm sorry, we cannot get Steam Vents to cast Pest, which means we don't have Domain. And if you don't have the right cards, it's not the end of the world.
Pest Control mana.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, getting Domain, there's clearly some thought there. Makes me wonder if Pest is in the hand. Maybe Chris also thinks I can let Rodney have a turn with all of this. If I develop some big creature and then Pest Control, clean it up and start beating down. When your opponent misses a land drop, sometimes you can do plays like this that normally you wouldn't want to. It's Tribal Flames.
Tribal Flames on the Ragavan.
Yeah, I like Stone Rains, and that plays like a Stone Rain to me, so.
Yeah, and I don't know if Rodney has a way to play a creature or really do much of anything. I think there is a discharge in the hand. We are going to get the end step trigger from the Pride, from the lifelink on the Pride, but I mean, taking out that Ragavan really slowed things down for Rodney.
Yeah, and heads up play there from Chris. I think there were other things available, but just sort of like, hey, if I can just get this game to be a little bit more my tempo, it will be okay. Let's take some time to do that here. So here comes that Plains as Chris just fetching up the same lands every game. The Domain life.
Yeah. So here we go. 3 mana available to Chris. Worth noting, if Pest Control is something he has, it is online now. But it's going to be a Flage targeting the Guide of Souls, it looks like. That's going to gain Chris 3 life. I think is that a Blood Moon in hand for Rodney?
Yeah, Rodney's had that Blood Moon from turn 1. It's been hiding on the back. And there's another Guide of Souls.
Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and swing in. I mean, Rodney is putting on a decent clock here. We do get to jump the Ocelot Pride with our Guide here.
Yeah, I mean, this is a ton of damage. And, Chris is showing that, like, hey, my burn spells can sometimes play like removal. And Flage is going to allow you to do that and not fall too far behind if you can escape it right away. But it's going to be at least 1 more turn before that can happen, and 2 more cards.
Yeah, so you're going to play a Surveil land here. Put that into the bin. Which means the next turn with a fetch, we could have Flage online. There's the Pest Control. Takes care of everything on Rodney's board. And now Chris threatening the Flage next turn.
Yeah, and Rodney passes the turn back. And, if we got the Ajani down, maybe we can blow up the Ajani. And, Arena of Glory for the Flage.
Oh, this is tough. This puts Chris so far back in the game.
Boom.
I just can't help but think how all of this really comes down to Chris taking care of that Ragavan at the right time.
Yeah, prioritizing making sure that, the Ragavan never connected again. Very heads up play. We see another heads up play here from Rodney. Galvanic discharging for 0. So if we draw another discharge, we can actually answer the Flage.
Jeez, this is brutal as we simply pass back to Chris, a Wear Tear being the draw for Rodney this turn.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, there's only a Flage in play, but that's all you need. That card will win the game if it goes uncontested. It's made that way.
Going to be 9 damage. And pass over to Rodney. I mean, we finally found that second land. We got to pay 2 life to play it. That is going to be game. Congratulations to Chris taking it down. going to be 4-0 going into our next round with Domain Zoo.
Yeah, I mean, really impressive stuff there. I think it shows like why some of the players are really leaning towards it. Obviously, Rodney was a little, had some issues that game with mana, but game one, kind of a similar thing we had playing mana. In that game, we did function really well for a bunch of the turns. So, I mean, you keep some one landers with this deck, especially on the player Froggervan. This is a strength of the deck. You get to do things like that. So I think, when we have these games happen that create some sort of games that look like non-games, it's important to remember that normally, that's a really strong thing there for Rodney with the energy deck. So wanted to highlight that. We are going to see if we can get an interview with Chris. Chris maybe, wants to do some other stuff. We'll let you know about that. But we do have a backup feature match either way. So we are going to have some more Magic this round here in just a second. But yeah, I mean, the Domain Zoo deck, very appealing, especially if you're wanting to play something that's a little bit more off the beaten path, has those powerful starts, has that interaction. And I mean, with Chris here with 4 main deck consigned memories, really has a lot of game versus both the Flicker deck, the Breach deck to some extent. You can stop some of that stuff early on. And the Eldrazi deck, obviously, everyone sideboards that card for them, and Chris just has it in the main deck.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something very cool about the modern format in general is that, we have these decks that are the leaders of the format. We've heard people all day saying, oh, you got to be playing Breach. And if you're not playing Breach, why aren't you playing Breach? But also very frequently we see, decks like Zoo or even like Merfolk, stuff like that, do well at tournaments specifically. And I don't know, I think it's just a really good sign of a format that things like this can perform and beat out these decks that everyone's saying are the decks we have to play. But we have an interview with Chris that we can go down to. Chris, congratulations on taking down Boros Energy there in our round.
How are you feeling, Chris? You're starting off 4-0 today here at the event. You're playing Zoo. Are you feeling good about things? How's the deck, and how did we land on Zoo for the tournament today?
I've been playing Zoo for many years, and obviously it's evolved over all those years. I have a lot of experience with it, and I tune it frequently. And I felt good going into these matchups because Zoo is so, I guess, flexible.
Mm-hmm.
It can play many roles. It can go aggro, mid-range, tempo, whatever you want it to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we were talking in that game too about, I mean, obviously Rodney ended up getting a bit mana screwed, but it felt like really the turning point, the most pivotal moment of that game to me was when you decided to tribal flames the Ragavan. That just like completely, stopped Rodney dead in their tracks. How do you feel going into these matchups? I mean, like you said, the deck is very flexible. How do you feel looking at a hand and trying to decide, like, okay, when do I need to tribal flames a creature? When do I need to cast this pest control? Like, how do you manage navigating all that?
Yeah, it's based on the matchup and the board state, obviously. Against Boros, you have to learn to slow down a little bit, Zoo. They're obviously a better aggro deck than you are, but we win with better creatures and I think better individual cards. I think during that specific matchup, I noticed he was strangled on mana, so I went after his Ragavan, and I said I'll worry about the Guide of Souls later. Pest Control was a good top deck. I'm not gonna lie. It basically won that game, I think. So.
Yeah, Pest Control are, I think, a really smart innovation for this deck here. And it seems very clear that you have a lot of care and love for Zoo. And that makes me have this question for you of, you have these 4 consigns in the main deck. Is it sort of the metagame in combination with it and Flasia got you there? And how did you land on these 4 consigns? Because historically, we've seen Stubborn Denial sort of in that spot, right? So how did we land on that for this weekend?
I moved all my stubbies to the board. Black-White really pushed me into consigned main. That's a little bit of a harder matchup for us with Solitudes. So I wanted to mitigate that. It's very good against Titan, and I know Titan's popular here. And it also scams my Flage with Arena. So it's never quite dead.
I love it. That makes a ton of sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for talking to us, Chris. Again, congratulations. Extremely well played. Obviously, a very skilled pilot of this deck, and good luck on the rest of your matches today.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, hopefully we'll see more of Chris in that zoo deck later. We're going to check in on our backup feature match. It is a time-shifted one, so let's head on down to that right now and get some more Magic action for y'all.
Yeah, as we are going to be looking at Sean Ryder on the Orzhov Blink deck against Cody Murray on the Teamer Grinding Station deck here. It looks like Sean on the play for this one, just going to be fetching up a Surveil land. As for Cody here, we had turn 1 Tamio Bauble. Not the most explosive Grinding Station Breach turn 1 we've ever seen, but certainly a strong one.
Yeah, and I mean, that's part of the thing with this deck, right? Like we've seen some, near turn 1 wins, a very strong, obviously, thing that this deck gets to do. Also gets to play this kind of normal games like this, where, if Cody just, attacks, flips the Tameo here by popping the clue, that's a very reasonable place to just end up. And, that is like this fair, grindy-ish control game plan. That is something this deck gets to do and have those insane starts that kind of, thread the kill on turn 2.
Yeah, Sean also very strong turn 2 here, straight into the Emperor of Bones, which, as we talked about earlier, can exile anything from the graveyard, which very relevant against a deck like this, as we are going to see the Tamio flip from Cody.
Mm-hmm.
Here we go. A lot of options available to Sean here.
And that is, a big part of the appeal of this Blink deck is, we talked about it earlier, kind of plays like a control deck in some regards, and can kind of pick people apart, and you just get to play it a lot of different ways, and things like, oh, we have no more lands, no more basics in deck. That was a Stone Rain.
Is that our only basic?
I'll say this, the other one has to be in hand if it's not, and I didn't see it before.
Yeah, I'm taking a look at the deck list now. Yeah, we have 1 island. Oh, that's our only basic.
Yeah, and things like this, you gotta have room for a lot of duels to make the, your mana really work. But you see some players have some basics for life total reasons or White Orchid Phantom reasons as it becomes a bigger and bigger part of the format. You've seen energy players have it in their sideboard, and sometimes they bring it in against you to fight over the Saga plan. And now this Orzhov Blink deck's main decking it. If you're heading into these RCs over the next couple of weeks, you might want to consider having another basic, or trying to hopefully not get got by this, as this Blink deck is real and lots of people are playing it.
Yeah, and everyone's playing sort of different exact lists of this Blink deck. Looks like Sean is on 3 White Orchid Phantoms in the main, 1 in the side. And if I'm Sean Ryder right now, I am definitely making a mental note of, okay, Cody has 1 basic land.
Yeah, game 2 and 3 is to be huge information to know.
Yeah, this huge information.
Speaking of huge here, Cody just cashing in on the Tameo now to get back the Rumble. Going to use the Scion and the mana from the Tameo, it seems, to recast Rumble.
Yeah, very, very efficient use of his mana here. So we are seeing another Tameo picked up from the Rumble. What a sequence of plays. Rumble, sack Tameo to get Rumble back, play Rumble, get Tameo back.
Yeah, it is a wild place to be. And there are worlds too where, like, with the right cards in hand for Cody, that was a win. If you had some more mocks, or just a couple of artifacts, turn that one on, you cast the Breach, you have a station hiding out somewhere, that would be a winning turn. So it just shows you this deck can go from 0 to 60 real fast, even when it has slow starts.
Yeah, as you're gonna go ahead and get into combat, Sean exiling a Mox Opal from Cody's graveyard, attacking in with these creatures, getting in for some damage, pressuring that life total. And then we are going to bolt in this land. And I think that's an Aven Interrupter. I think that is the fun of one of Aven Interrupter in Sean's hand.
Yes, and that card is fairly strong just in general. It's just a powerful card. Something in Sam that hadn't seen play yet, but is good. Really powerful with ephemerate. But against the breach deck now, the little flavor text on the card of cards in the graveyard and cards from exile cost 2 more to cast. Really coming up big here. Players normally don't think of the exile part because of how Avid Interrupter plots a card. But if Cody goes for a breach, and we have Aven Interrupter in play, all the cards we escape will cost 2 more mana, which means you just basically can't combo unless your deck is like, 6 cards in deck already.
Yeah, as we are seeing end of turn here, Orcish Bowmasters to shoot down the Scion.
Yep.
Orcish Bowmasters also a fun of one of in Sean's deck.
Yeah, this deck has just a lot of tutoring available. So, between both the Recruiter of the Guards and honestly, Overlord of the Bailmark, milling 4 cards, that's going to see a lot of your deck. So having these one-of can be really high impact in certain spots. And, in spots like we're seeing right now, sort of put your opponent in these weird positions where they have to play around these cards.
Yeah, Philia is also going to get flashed in. And we're going to Fatal Push the Tamio, attack in with all these creatures.
Yeah, it looks like maybe there was a Emperor of Bones. I don't know if it was said or whatever. It is a beginning of combat trigger, and Sean was like attacking. Maybe it was, I don't exactly know. We'll have a judge look at this here. No real information was gained or lost, but yeah, and with a time shifted match too. Apparently, this is a long judge call. We're gonna cut back here. Maybe we can fast forward and use the power of the VCR, see if it works. I actually don't know how that works. I'm just here to talk, so that's what I do.
Sure, yeah. I mean, we were just talking about how this black-white blink deck is able to run all of these sort of sort of toolboxy creatures because we have a lot of ways to tutor them. We have a lot of ways to get through our deck, play from our graveyard, all of these things. But right now we are really seeing, as we're getting back into the match here, I mean, Sean just kind of like having it all. Having everything sort of right when he needs it. I mean, this Wide Orchid Phantom just taking care of these lands. It looks like that was flickered by the Philia to get rid of the Urza's Saga. I think we maybe missed the Emperor Bones trigger. I think that's maybe what was decided here because I don't see anything new exiled with it. Maybe we got another Mox Opal. Kind of hard to tell.
Yeah, I can't tell because of the way the graveyards are laid out. There were definitely one in the yard before. I think what ended up, I don't know the exact ruling, but it was definitely about the Emperor. And it looks like they did get to rewind, but it doesn't really matter. That would not have caused, I think, too much of a difference there with the Aven Interrupter and hand there for Sean. Really showing us, though, just how good this deck is at, sort of picking apart your opponent while applying a little bit of pressure. And let's take a look at the sideboard to see what these players have to fight over each other. I think people are starting to realize now this black-white blink deck is a presence in the metagame. Even if you think it's bad, it's popular.
Absolutely. As we're going to first take a look at the Teamer Breach list from Cody. Now, we've mentioned many times today that the Teamer Breach, I mean, just the Breach Grinding Station deck in general is not settled on. A lot of different takes on it. So what do you think about what Cody's got here, what his options are on the side?
Yeah, so I mean, you definitely want your Boseiju type cards. You want to fight over the, stony, silency type things you can expect. The deck plays Aether Vial. So even though you're giving them a land, giving them 1 mana versus, the repeatable instant speed, uncounterable, multiple mana Vial gets, you're fine with that. Life in the Loam provides a way to actually create a backup plan with Urza Saga and also the Loam. So I think that's a little bit of a package. Probably want the Nature's Claim too. I can see Flame of Anor fight over some of the creatures, maybe draw some cards if you're lucky and have a creature in play. Probably want the Jace just to play around surgical type cards. And we talked about before, I'm really interested to see how players want to use Consign in this matchup. It is something that can stop a Felga and Flicker Wisp trigger. I think this is probably not Cody has so many cards to bring in. I don't think this is a spot where we want it. Whereas with Dimir Frog, I really liked it because I think you had so many cards to cut.
Sure, it makes a lot of sense. Let's take a look over at Sean's list on this Orzhov Blink deck, another one where the list is very, everyone's kind of playing their own flavor of it. We're seeing, as mentioned earlier, that 4th White Orchid Phantom. We've got Thoughtseizes. We have Fairy Macabre, Grafdigger's Cage. I mean, a lot of Stony silences. We have a lot of hate pieces here. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, literally every card in this sideboard is reasonable to bring in versus Breach, except Plague Engineer. That is the only one that is like not that reasonable. And we saw too with the one basic White Orchid Phantom, kind of goes up. Now there are varying degrees. What that does mean though is that Sean needs to figure out what cards we really, really want. I think Wrath the Skies, that's a way to fight it with a fair plan. Stony Silence, that's going to make it so the artifacts don't work. Fairy Macabres, and is a little lower on. Maybe you don't want to fight this fight. It's tutorable. Now, sometimes it's clutch. There's a lot of going on there. Draen's Magistrate, you won't be able to cast cards from exile. Sometimes that comes up with different iterations of these decks. But I think overall, it really matters on what do you think your opponent's doing and how you want to go about it. The whole sideboard has reasons it could be reasonable. So, and Breach is sort of the deck that people are playing. So I kind of like having access to all this. And then an open decklist tournament like an RC, this would be sort of a nightmare to figure out because you could see anything in between. So let's get back to the play areas. I think our players are ready.
Absolutely. As we're going to get into our game 2 here, Sean Ryder on Orzhov Blink up a game. Cody on Temur Breach going to be on the play here. Just going to play a tap Steam Vents and go. As far as turn 1 grinding station turns go, very lackluster, but going to be followed up with an Emery and a Mox Amber. So we're seeing the Jace and a Opal and looks like just a couple of lands.
Yeah, Jace Bobble, a couple of lands. So that draw engine is going to be online for Cody this game. And it's curious too, right? Like you mentioned, kind of a slower start makes you wonder, what does Cody have in hand where this is something that we're really interested in? Now, I think Cody maybe brought in Whip Flare. I see a red card in hand. We're flicking fast here, so I could be mistaken. That's a card that sometimes lines up great and really matters against Orzhov. Other times the damage has been done and it doesn't really line up as well as you'd like. So I'm going to be curious to see sort of how players continue to think about that card and how they want to play this matchup, as it is early on in the days of playing against these Orzhov decks.
Yeah, as Emperor of Bones going to be the turn 2 play once again for Sean Ryder, going to get rid of that Bauble, which, I mean, as of right now, gives Emery nothing to target. But there is the Flame of Anor from the sideboard to take care of the Emperor of Bones.
Yet Emery being a wizard matters so much here. Getting those 2 cards as well, and really help this card kind of even see main deck play in some people's builds, because it's just kind of nice, sort of a sideboard card you want some percentage of the time you already have in your deck, and you're good to rock and roll from there.
Yep, and there is the Mox Opal. Not enough artifacts quite yet to get that online, but very powerful nonetheless. I see a Solitude in Sean's hand. I think that might also be a Wrath the Skies. Kind of hard to tell.
Yeah, I think there's a Wrath, a Solitude, a Overlord of the Balemark, an Aven Interrupter, and a Thoughtseize. Maybe a White Orchid Phantom. Yeah, it does look like White Orchid got flicked to the front here. So Sean has a bevy of options, and this is where a lot of the real, I think, nuance and skill comes in this Orzhov matchup. Is like, okay, I can only play 1 card a turn where I don't have Aether Vial most of the time. What do I do here? How do I want to set things up? Do I want to hold up Aven Interrupter? It's such a powerful card. Do I want to save this for later? Do I want to Thoughtseize this turn? How do I go about it? I think a lot of ways to think, a lot of things to think about, and a lot of ways to play these turns, as we are seeing White Orchid Phantom go Stone Rain mode.
Yeah, I mean, we see the island on the field. We know that is Cody's only basic. That is information we learned in game 1. So we're just gonna destroy one of Cody's lands.
Yeah, I think I like this a bit more than Thoughtseizing. Obviously, maybe you just die or whatever, right? Like you could have Thoughtseized, got rid of the Breach, but getting rid of that red land does force Cody's hand a little bit, because we don't have that mana anywhere else, and the Mox Opal's turned off. So that would mean either you get to Rumble or Breach. Now, obviously, Cody could have more lands in hand. He could draw more lands, but it is just a thing they actually have to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. As we go back over to Cody here, the Thassa's Oracle in the graveyard now. Seeing another Emery, which looks like that is going to be the play here.
Yep.
Keeping the old one, getting the mill trigger. And there is a Mox Amber.
And yeah, I mean, that's pretty big for potentially doing breach shenanigans.
Yeah, but I mean, is that our only artifact in the graveyard?
I think it is. I think we just haven't been able to find one. The bauble we milled near the start of the game just, got answered immediately. And
Yeah, that Emperor of Bones really, really changed the shape and texture of this game with this Mox Opal just being offline the whole time and Cody struggling to find a third artifact.
yeah, and I mean, this deck plays like a decent amount of artifacts. It's probably, I haven't looked up the exact Frank Carson math, but I remember hearing from someone that it's like I'm kind of an artifact short, and that's why some people like the white version. Get Portable Hole, Kill Spell, gets you up to kind of, Mox Opal's really consistent range. But, there's also just, even if you have enough, it's just going to sometimes fail, as we're going to see Cody try to find the combo by chaining Emeries. This is something that a lot of the Breach players really advocate for, is sort of like, hey, even if you don't fully have it, start chaining your looks, because sometimes you can just win, especially when your opponent's tapped out and have very few options to interact.
Yeah, very few options indeed. I mean, we do have the Solitude, but how much? Oh, there's the Mox Opal in the graveyard as well. We still need a third artifact.
Yeah, and you're seeing this here. So Cody's going to escape this Amber. Could also use the Emery, but I think it's going to Emery on some future artifact here. And now it's going to try and replay this Amber. And we could see Sean get rid of the Emery to stop this looping, because currently you're going down 2 cards each iteration, but you're seeing a lot of looks. And yeah, Sean's saying, you know what? In response to this, I do want to get rid of that Emery and turn off this mana engine for you. Excuse me.
Yeah, and Cody deciding how he wants to respond to this.
This is with the Amber on the stack. It's my understanding. Don't know how else we have priority, but
yeah, it's what it seems like.
Of note too, Cody already milled one of the Underworld breaches. So we're down to 2 breaches in deck. Now, we've talked in the past, Shifting Woodlands gives you, sort of another breach. But when you're a little tight on mana, or under the gun, both those things make that a little bit of a less viable option.
Yeah, and now we have no mana left. Have to pass back over to Sean. Just these two lonely Moxen that can't produce any mana at all. Let's get in for a little damage with our White Orchid Phantom. And that's going to be a Thoughtseize. Well, it looks like that was the Whip Flare, which is the only card we can take with the Thoughtseize. The only other card there is a land. And that's going to be an impending Overlord here, which we see the Drannith Magistrate, we see a Solitude, we see a White Orchid Phantom, and we see a Recruiter of the Guard.
Yeah, it looks so. And yeah, you're seeing Sean sort of being like, okay, coast is kind of clear. I'm going to tap out. Even if you breach me next turn, you can do the everything we talked about before, but it's going to be, sort of low on resources. Maybe I can, stall up enough to get there, and I kind of need some more things to clock you. Could hold up Aven Interrupter, but, if your opponent just like land goes, you're not really moving anywhere. Could preemptively play it just to get a clock, but if you see Whip Flare, you got to think there's more kill spells coming where that came in.
Well, and we can't even like chain Emrys anymore, right? Like one of them's exiled.
Oh yeah, great point. Yeah,
we can just get one.
A little one and done. Call it a day.
A little one and done. Which, I mean, if I was Cody and I drew Breach, I think I would say thank you for the one chance. It looks like a Malevolent Rumble. I mean, pretty nice find here. We're gonna see land, Opal, land.
Yeah, I mean, interesting spot here. We've used all the Surveil lands, it seems. Takes the Opal. I like that preemptive fetch there for Cody. Really try to put themselves in a position to have, everything ready to go, and also not get got by, the Rumble hitting like Breach and the 1 red source. The 2 life could end up mattering, but what ends up mattering way more is having something like that go off when it does feel like the game is starting to slip away a little bit from you here.
Yeah, I mean, just brutal, not able to find this third artifact. Really just it's incredible how impactful that one uh Emperor of Bones was to this game.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, Emperor Bones, soft graveyard hate, but getting, one activation here and there, especially against decks like this, sometimes come up in huge ways like this and really show, little things go a long way.
Yeah, and there is Drannith Magistrate. And this is kind of what you were talking about earlier when playing against there's our bauble. We have Opal online finally. Playing against the grinding station decks, you need to be able to attack them on multiple axes. And Sean is just doing that perfectly right now, where we are pressuring the life total. We are keeping Cody off the combo with this Drannith, like we're just making parts of the combo harder with this Drannith Magistrate. We are pressuring from all these different angles, and Cody really struggling to have a path back here.
Yeah, and I mean, Sean sort of has the game wrapped up if we hold the Save and Interrupter. It's really hard to imagine Cody ever getting out of it. We're going to try and actually just put the game on an end state here by playing Overlord of the Baelmerk. Sort of
Yeah.
one of our things. May pick up a Solitude, could also pick up Recruiter, could pick up, we're going to go with Ophelia. But Cody here, I think would I give some props there. Bobbled upkeep, very smart. We saw Thought Seize from the opponent, and if we do something like Breach like we did, we want to have it here. But with the Drannith Magistrate in play, Cody can't cast any of the cards in the graveyard. Could have drawn something like an Unholy Heat, which would have been devastating in this position, but instead doesn't have it, and is now facing down this Overlord of the Baelmerk, who was flickered in, so it's got itself alive now. It's unimpeded.
Yeah, very, very interesting here as we are going to pass back over to Sean, who seems to have it wrapped up as the players are shaking hands. And I think that is going to be a clean 2-0 from Sean Ryder on the Orzhov Blink deck. Congratulations, Sean. Going to be 4-0 going into our next round with this Orzhov Blink. I mean, incredible. I mean, such a cool deck. Really excited to see it played. It's so much fun to see it piloted by people who are truly skilled with it. So just really a privilege to get to watch.
Yeah, it was great to see, and I think it really shows too that there's a lot of play to both these decks. And I think while some of the people who play a lot of Breach really think this matchup isn't the scariest thing in the world for them, that you do, even though if you're not afraid of a matchup, you do need to kind of think about it, right? And there's still a lot of things to be learned in these sort of games. And I think we did a really good job of playing those games, especially from the Breach side. We did a lot. I mentioned a lot of moments, right? These little decisions that I think end up being huge. We ended up not going our way. We ended up having, things not work out in that regard, but that doesn't mean, it's over. And there's still just a lot going on in the matchup when it comes to learning the nuances, the intricacies. So I think that this is a matchup I'm going to be really curious to see how is it played and how we're thinking about it 3 months from now. Once both these decks have kind of hit their maybe, final states, is this a thing we're worried about? Is it not? I'm going to be really interested to look back at this coverage in this round at that point. But I think that actually does it for this round, Niall.
Yeah, I think so too, as we are going to take a short break as we get back into the Magic later. We're going to bring more rounds. We're going to be playing Magic all day, all weekend, as we have tomorrow our Team Trios Standard Modern Legacy. Going to be a very exciting event. Stay tuned.